Yo, what's up guys, the Animated here, back at it again with another What If, and today we will be doing What If Deku Had a Sound Quirk, part 6, I believe, not 100% sure, but anyway, let's jump back in. Last time we left off was after Deku had beaten Todoroki. I did forget to mention Deku beat Todoroki well, but there were injuries sustained. Deku had a couple of fractures up his right and left arm, as well as Todoroki having a couple of bruised ribs. Anyway, let's jump back into the what if. Izuku would have gone and fought every battle that Todoroki would have, and I don't even really care about the other battles. Let's just jump straight to the finals, which would be the Bakugo um um the Bakugo one. So anyway, Izuku would go up against Bakugo as the two would enter the ring. Let's just call it that. Bakugo would be standing on the one side with Izuku on the other, as Bakugo would yell out, "Hey Deku, I hope you're not. I hope you're not planning on holding back on me." As Izuku would say, "Not even dreaming of it, Kachan. I'm gonna win, so I'm definitely not holding back." Bakugo would scoff at this and say, "Ha, you win? It was pure luck that you beat the icy heart bastard. Don't come expecting to win against me." As Prison Mike would say, Prison Mike would say, "Whoa, the tension between these two are so thick you could cut it with a knife." Midnight would then step up as she'd say, "Both competitors ready? Begin." Hang on, guys. Sorry for the background noise. Yeah, my parents are cleaning. So anyway, Bakugo would start off the match by charging straight at Izuku with explosions propelling him, increasing his speed by so much more. That's when Izuku would see Bakugo coming with a large amount of speed, as he would use his own sound wave, but use it to burst to the side. Bakugo would shoot past Izuku, almost flying off the edge, but luckily he'd use his explosion to slow himself just near the edge of the ring. This is when Izuku would launch a sound wave, trying to get an easy win against Bakugo, but Bakugo would have heard the release of sound, as he would quickly shoot an explosion down at the ground, propelling himself upwards and over the sound attack. This is when he'd backflip and land in front of Izuku, as he launched an explosion straight to Izuku's chest, which Izuku would have seen coming but wouldn't have been able to block, as he'd been shot back a couple of feet. Izuku would have grinned at this, seeing that he was enjoying this fight. He'd then yell out to Bakugo, "Is that the best you got, Kachan?" Bakugo would look at him with a grin as he'd yell, "Like hell, nerd!" As Bakugo would charge at Izuku and Izuku would charge at Bakugo again, with the two meeting in the middle. Izuku had coated his fist in sound as he'd punched Bakugo square in the face, slightly dazing the boy because of the impact and both the sound ringing in his ear now. Bakugo would have stumbled back. Sorry, not COVID, I swear. But anyway, Bakugo would have stumbled back as he was now trying to shake himself back to full consciousness or out of this dazed state as he would proceed. But just as he would exit the dazed state, Izuku would be on top of him with a regular punch, as he'd make Bakugo stumble back again. Bakugo would see Izuku charging in for a third punch, but this is when he'd launch an explosion at Izuku's midsection, sending Izuku back, skidding across the floor. Bakugo would then charge in as he tried to stomp on Izuku, but Izuku would roll out of the way quickly and get to his feet. That's when Bakugo would then spin through the air with a hellacious kick that he'd plant firmly in Deku's side, as he'd send Deku flying to the other side of the ring. Izuku would have gotten up as he spit a little blood to the side, as he'd say, "Wow, Kachan, you're getting stronger. Your versatility and agility is getting much better as well. I didn't even think you could use your quirk that way." This is when Bakugo would look at him and say, "Ha! You should have known I would evolve, Deku. I'm not gonna get left behind by you." As the two would charge at each other once more. This time Izuku would launch himself into the air using his sound, and he'd launch himself down much faster using his sound again, making him like a short distance missile that was launched straight at Bakugo. Bakugo would have used exactly the same technique that Izuku did earlier in the match by launching an explosion to the side, thus avoiding Izuku altogether. Izuku would have seen this as he'd quickly change his direction using his sound and barrel down on Bakugo once more. Bakugo wouldn't have enough time to react, seeing as he was caught off guard by Izuku's sudden turn, and that's when Izuku would hit him with a shoulder straight in the midsection. Bakugo would be sent tumbling backwards as he'd grasp his stomach while getting up, saying, "Damn, you hit hard, Deku." Izuku would have gotten up as well, seeing as he hit Bakugo with a shoulder. That means he's also on the ground. So yeah, Izuku would have gotten up saying, "Heh, you can take a punch, Kashan, that's for sure." Bakugo would then charge at Izuku again, this time propelling himself with explosions, Izuku doing the same as well. The two would meet in the middle as they'd start grappling. By grappling, I mean like when you see wrestlers holding hands in the center of the ring. Kind of weird in my opinion, but still. The two would be pushing at each other with the one trying to assert dominance over the other. The crowd would have been loving this, seeing as this was one of the most fierce battles they'd seen in the entire sports festival. Bakugo would be slightly overpowering Izuku, but that's when Izuku would push back and he'd rip his hands free and launch two sound waves straight into Bakugo's stomach and chest, sending him backwards. That's when Izuku would rocket forward once again with his sound, as Bakugo would use his explosion to maneuver and land on his feet, avoiding Izuku. The two would be going at it for over 10 minutes, but slower and slower. Izuku would be getting slower and slower, while Bakugo would be getting stronger and stronger, seeing as he's exerting more sweat. Izuku would realize that he wouldn't be able to win this, not easy at all, as he'd begin charging up a large amount of sound in his legs as he burst forward at Bakugo. Shit. Hang on, guys. My bad, guys. I have sinus and dust gets caught in my throat, and that happens. But anyway, Izuku would be launching at Bakugo with massive amount of sound propelled behind him. The crowd would be roaring, and Izuku's sound would be exploding much higher and higher, as well as Bakugo's as well as Bakugo's explosions becoming stronger and stronger due to him sweating more nitroglycerin. That's when President Might would commentate, saying, "Wow, look at these two go! What the hell have you been feeding them, Aizawa? They look like two tanks on a battlefield." This is when Aizawa would just reply with, "I didn't do anything. They worked on this all by themselves." As the Bakugo and Izuku would meet in the middle yet again, but this time sending a small shockwave throughout the ring, causing some of the ground to crack. Bakugo and Izuku would be standing in the middle with explosions trying to dominate sound, as the two would be grappling with small explosions being set off in Bakugo's hand and sound being blasted out of Izuku's. The two would continuously stay there as you'd see the arena the ring cracking beneath them. Cementons would realize that they must be exerting a large amount of physical pressure for it to be doing this. As Bakugo and Izuku would quickly double back, Bakugo would get up to a mid-range close to Izuku as he'd launch an explosion straight at Izuku, with it barely grazing him. Izuku would have launched a sound wave at Bakugo, which he would avoid barely, as the sound wave would rip through his shirt. The two would be standing, facing each other, tired, lightly panting, as Izuku would tell Bakugo that they should finish this in one go. Bakugo would agree as he quickly launches himself into the air and starts spinning rapidly. Then suddenly he would yell out, "Howitzer, impact!" as he's launched straight at Izuku. Izuku would know that this is a really dangerous attack and that if he doesn't find a way to block or avoid it, it's game over. Izuku would quickly distort the sound around both his hands as he'd say, "Sound barrier shatter!" as he'd punch the air with a massive sonic boom being heard. Well, can't I just call it Sonic Fist? Or Sonic Punch? I'm calling it Sonic Punch, screw that. Izuku would punch the air with a sonic boom being heard. It would make contact with Bakugo's, I think it was leg? I'm not sure what it was of the how one's the impact that makes contact, but it would have made contact with Bakugo's howitzer impact. The two struggling for dominance. This is when Izuku would then decide that he needs to give it over 100%, as he distort his left hand as well, and then launch another attack, sending it straight at Bakugo. Bakugo would be flung back and out of the ring, just barely out of bounds. Bakugo would have gotten up and seen Izuku just standing there in the ring, as Midnight would announce, "The winner of the sports festival, Izuku Midoriya!" Izuku would be standing there, proud, happy, and Izuku would be standing in the center of the ring, chin up. He couldn't lift his arms though, they were fractured and hurting heavily. Bakugo would walk up to him as he'd smile, telling him that, "You did good, Deku." Bakugo would know that Izuku probably couldn't lift up his arms right now, seeing as the bones were heavily fractured, so he'd decide that he'd gently and carefully lift Izuku's arm above his head. Sorry for the multiple pauses, guys. But anyway, Bakugo would lift Izuku's arm above his head as the crowd would erupt in cheers at this good sportsmanship. Izuku would look at Bakugo and smile, saying, "Told you I'd win, Kachan." As Bakugo would help Izuku out of the ring into Recovery Girl's office, as Recovery Girl would heal both him and Bakugo, telling them that, "You fought Newt and Tail. You fought tooth and nail just for some dumb medal? What the hell is this?" As Izuku would proceed to tell her that it's not for the medal. They fought for their honor and their pride as rivals and friends. Recovery Girl would look at the two and then smile, saying, "You idiots!" as she'd hit them both over the head with her cane that's oddly shaped like a needle or a syringe. She'd then smile as she'd walk out, saying, "Just like Toshinori." Anyway, that's when Izuku and Bakugo would stumble out of Recovery Girl's office, seeing as they did lose a lot of stamina during the match and that they did inflict a large amount of damage on each other. The two would be barely walking through the halls to the podiums where they'd be receiving their medals in just a bit, as they'd be walking through, and out of nowhere the entire class 1A would just burst out of nowhere yelling, "Izuku! Bakugo! Well done!" As Izuku would be swarmed by most of the people, with Bakugo being swarmed by Denki and Kirishima, them telling him that, "It doesn't matter, Bakugo, bro, you'll get him next time, don't worry, man, there's no need to get angry." As Bakugo would tell him, "What the hell do you mean, get angry? That's Midoriya. I've known him for the longest time. He's the only person that I will allow to beat me. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna take it lying down, Deku. I'm gonna find a way to surpass you, and then All Might." As Izuku would smile and say, "You're welcome to come at me anytime, Kachan." As the class would laugh. They would then go to the cafeteria as they'd get a small something to eat, and then head out to the podium where they'd be receiving their medals. Ida and Tokuyami, well, no. You know what? Let's have it. Ida and Shoto would be in third place, Bakugo in second. Meanwhile, he's not fuming this time. Do note, not fuming. And Izuku in first. Ida wouldn't be able to make it due to family matters. And that's when they would be told that they get about a week off. Izuku would go home and he would go to a gig, as he would invite both Kyoka and Bakugo this time. As Bakugo would be sitting next to Kyoka, telling her that, "I swear, if you're just after the money and the fame, I'm gonna end you." Kyoka would look at him and say, "No, I'm not. I genuinely care for Izuku. I love him." As Bakugo would look at her and say, "Huh, I'll believe it when I see it." So eventually the concert, Eventually the concert would end and Izuku would have them both taken home, with Izuku going back to his apartment. By the end of the week, his mom would have returned, as she would be surprised that Izuku kept the house this tidy. It would be clean and neat, and there wouldn't be a speck of dust anywhere. She'd then enter what was her room and would see a queen-size bed, two bedside tables, a desk, a chest of drawers, a mirror, a closet, walk-in closet, mind you, and a bunch of clothes and jewelry. Izuku would tell her that, yeah, if she wants anything else, feel free to go buy it, as he'd put a credit down on her dresser and walk out. She would look at the credit card and see that it was after Izuku Midoriya, or yeah, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku would have three separate credit cards, the one being his personal account, the second one being the Clover account, and the third being, well, his school lunch account. But anyway, Izuku would then go and cook breakfast for his mom, who had just arrived out of the hospital, as he'd make eggs, bacon, a side of toast, and some beans. He'd set it out on the table for them to have as, well, you know what? Scratch that. Let's go with a traditional Japanese breakfast. Ramen. I know that's not a traditional Japanese breakfast, but it's like Naruto's breakfast. So it fits perfectly fine with me. I don't care. I love ramen. So anyway, Izuku and his mother would be having some ramen, as he would finish up and then wash the bowls. Inko would ask him if he has any plans for today, as Izuku would say, no, not really. He was just planning on getting some training done. Inko would look at him and then say that, well, she would, if he didn't mind, she would like to spend some time with him. Izuku would nod, as him and his mom would go out for the day, just doing random stuff, shopping, carnivals, or whatever. As the next day would roll around and Izuku would have to head back to class, Izuku would walk into class as he would be seated with Bakugo telling him that, hey, is Auntie Inko back yet? As Izuku would say, yeah, she came back yesterday. Bakugo would grin as he'd say, oh, hell yeah, my mom's been itching to see her again. As Izuku would smile and say, yo, you can come by any time. Just give a little bit of a heads up first, okay? Bakugo would nod as he'd take his seat. That's when Kyoko would walk in and she'd be seated next to Izuku, as she'd ask how his mom's doing. Izuku would reply with, she's doing just fine, as Ida would walk in and everybody would see him just a little bit different. Izuku would then remember hearing on the news that Geminium was injured by the Hirokiller stain, but he would try to talk with Ida about that later. That's when Aizawa would pop up and he would talk about the internships. Not the internships. Damn it, I forgot what it was. No, it's the internship. Yeah. Work studies come later. It's internships at the moment. So anyway, Aizawa would speak about the internships and then that they would have to choose the places they would be going. Izuku would then be scrolling through all the internships that he got, seeing as he did get quite a lot, alongside Todoroki and Bakugo. Everybody else would have a minimal but a good amount of internships, with them doing pretty well. Everybody would go to their internships as in canon. Same with Izuku, who would go to Gran Torino. Seeing as Gran Torino did find it interesting to see how versatile Izuku's quirk was. So anyway, yeah, Izuku would go to Gran Torino, and the moment he steps through the door, he would see Gran Torino laid out flat on the ground. Izuku would speed over as he turned Gran Torino around and place his hand on Gran Torino's pulse, feeling a steady heartbeat. Fuck. Sorry, guys. He'd feel a steady heartbeat as he'd back away, seeing Gran Torino set up. Gran Torino would look at him and say, I fell down and missed my food. Izuku would look at him and say, wow, you nearly gave me a heart attack. As Gran Torino would say, well, if you were late, I could have died. With Izuku saying, sorry, I'm late. Gran Torino would then proceed to tell Izuku that fuck, my chest hurts now. That he wants to see where he stands, with Izuku nodding. Gran Torino would then quickly zoom around the room at top speed with Izuku barely being able to keep up. That's when Izuku would realize he can hear Gran Torino. He can hear his every single move. Izuku would close his eyes as he would be focusing on the sound. He would then begin to dodge he would then try to dodge Gran Torino's attacks, as he'd be able to predict where they'd be coming from, but wouldn't be fast enough to avoid them. Gran Torino would be landing blow after blow after blow on Izuku, but he would realize that Izuku is quickly adapting to this. That's when he would decide that he would be kicking it up one more notch. He'd go beyond, he'd reach his max speed, well, the maximum of his max speed, as he would be pounding on Izuku. Not leaving any fatal injuries, but he'd be hitting Izuku quite rapidly. Izuku would quickly he would easily be outsped by Gran Torino, and the damage would be done. Gran Torino would then stop and tell Izuku that, "You did well, kid. I gotta tell you, you did really well." Izuku would then smile as he would look at Gran Torino with a blue eye and a busted tooth. Gran Torino would then say, "Might have overdone it just a bit," as Izuku would have nodded, saying, "You think?" But anyway, the next day would roll around as Gran Torino would try to teach Izuku the same lessons as in canon, with Izuku picking up on how to use Gran Torino's trick, Gran Torino's jumping off the walls, but Izuku can do it in any area, seeing as his sound doesn't need to be affected by the walls, so he could bounce off of solid air just by launching sound. Izuku would also learn that Izuku had already learned that he could enhance his speed via sound, but Gran Torino had taught it to him in a different way. Instead of launching sound out of your body to increase it, try surrounding your body with a layer of sound that would constantly be pushing away the wind resistance, therefore making you faster and much more quiet. He would also have taught Izuku how to silence all sound around him, seeing as Izuku can control sound, and Izuku would have learned how to listen to sound, meaning that he would be able to pick up on where you're coming from, no matter how fast you are. He'd be able to pick up where you're coming from just by the slightest sound. Even the sound of a gentle breath he'd be able to pick up, and then he'd be able to pinpoint your exact location. This does require a large amount of concentration, and that's what he and Gran Torino would be working on for the week. They'd constantly be trying to increase Izuku's speed to make sure that he can keep up with the sound that was heard and not get pummeled by it. Sorry guys, I had to burp and then, you get the gist. But anyway, the end of the week would roll around as Gran Torino would tell Izuku that they should probably get some actual patrolling done, as they'd head over to Hosu City via train. That's when Izuku would just be sitting in silence, as out of nowhere he'd hear a sound echoing from the side of the train. He'd quickly look out as he'd see a Nomu rushing in with a pro hero. That's when he'd quickly tell everybody in the part of the train in front of him to move out of the way, as he'd quickly grab a bunch of them and toss them aside, as well as using his sound to move some of them back. That's when out of nowhere, bam, the Nomu would hit the side of the train with a pro hero. Gran Torino would notice that Izuku had noticed this, as he'd quickly hop to action and kick the Nomu straight out of the train, as he'd yell back, "Stay here, kid! I got some work to do." Izuku would look out of the now still standing train as he'd see the Hosu City up in flames. Hang on, guys. Izuku would follow Gran Torino as he'd launch himself at the train using his sound. He'd be blitzing through Hosu City as he'd be watching the chaos. He'd take down a few Nomus using his sound to basically blow up their brains. On his way, as he'd be running through the city, he'd eventually come across Manuel, as he'd ask, "Manuel, where's Ida?" Manuel would then say that Ida had run off somewhere he doesn't know. Izuku would then realize that Ida must be targeting the hero killer, as he'd quickly run to a open street, as he'd keep quiet and focus on the sounds. Fudge. He'd be focusing on the sounds. He'd then focus out on a single voice, this being Ida's voice. Ida yelling at the hero killer. He would have pinpointed that Ida is about 5 blocks away. Not 5 blocks, 3 blocks away, sorry. As he'd quickly send out an alert to Todoroki, typing as he'd be running his way there. Just as he turned the corner, the hero killer Stain would then have stabbed Ida in the hand, as he'd sprint at the hero killer, launching him with a massive sound wave, sending the hero killer back a couple of feet. Ida would look at Izuku as he'd say, "Midoriya, what the hell are you doing here? This is my fight. Get out of here." As Izuku would say, "No, Ida, I've come to help you." As the hero killer would say, My, another fake hero for me to kill. The city's just full of them." As Izuku would say, "I don't know what your deal is, but I will not allow you to hurt any more innocent people. I don't care if they're fake heroes, they're still people." Stain would see the resolve in Izuku as he'd say, "Oh, maybe you're not a fake hero. Tell you what, I'll let you live. But him and that fake pro hero over there, they're not allowed to live. They've already been tainted by society." As he'd quickly charge at Stain, with Izuku getting in his way, launching him with sound saying, "I can't allow that." Stain would look a little bit annoyed as he'd say, "Well, I hate to do it, but I guess I'll have to take out another real hero in the making." As he then charged at Izuku with the intent to kill, he would be slashing, cutting at Izuku, with Izuku avoiding the attacks, as he'd be using his sound to, basically sound slipstream, which is what I'm calling it, one of Izuku's new special techniques. That's when he covers himself in a small layer of sound, allowing the wind to pass over him by distorting the small layer of sound around his body. Stain would have been surprised at the speed that Izuku's moving at, as he continued trying to slash and slash and slash, but Izuku would be avoiding it. Izuku would be just fast enough to avoid it, but he wouldn't be fast enough to land any blows. That's when he'd hear something, a crackling of ice. Izuku would quickly jump back as a small glacier of, small spike of ice would send the hero killer careening back, wobbling a bit on as he'd get onto his legs. He'd then look over to see Todoroki, as Izuku would say, "Thanks, Todoroki." Todoroki would then say, "You're lucky I got the coordinates right." As Izuku would say, "Sorry." That's when the hero killer would then look annoyed as he'd say, "Wow, this is turning out to be more trouble than I asked for. I've got 3 fake heroes and 1 real hero in the making that doesn't want to go." As the fight would go, basically as the canon, with Izuku and Shoto fighting off the hero killer up until Ida can get back into the fray. As the 3 would be fighting and fighting and fighting, and eventually Izuku would send a massive sound wave straight at the hero killer, not bursting his eardrums, but hurting his ears just enough for him to, lose focus and balance, as Shoto would have frozen the hero killer. Do note, native, he's fine, as Izuku would then tell Ida that he would then yell at Ida, "What the hell were you thinking, Ida? You're an idiot. You can't fight the hero killer Stain alone. He's killed so many pro heroes, and you think you can just take him down like this?" Ida would then look up and say, "But what he did to my brother, it's unforgivable." Izuku would then smack Ida across the face and say, "I understand that you're hurting, Ida, but going to get yourself killed is not what Tensei would have wanted." As Ida would look at me and say, "How do you know his name?" Izuku would then reply, "I've seen him at my concerts multiple times. He's a good customer. He's a good friend of mine." As Ida would ask, "Concerts, what do you mean?" Izuku would then realize that what he said, as he'd say, "I'll tell you later. Just help me tie up the hero killer." As Stain would have, suffered from hypothermia because of Shoto's ice, as Shoto would melt the ice and they would tie him up. They would all walk the hero killer Stain out, as pro heroes being Endeavor and Gran Torino would arrive. This is when, out of nowhere, they'd hand the hero killer over, not out of nowhere, but they'd hand the hero killer over to Endeavor and Gran Torino, when the Nomu would swoop down. Izuku would have heard it, but just too late as the Nomu would grab onto him. Izuku would shatter the Nomu's arms using the sound to break the bone, but that's when the hero killer Stain would basically just how do I put it? The hero killer would break free as he'd kill the Nomu and stand behind Izuku saying, well, giving his canon speech. But then he'd look at Izuku and say, I entrust the fate of the world to you, not these fake heroes. Do your best to make the real ones. Well, to make more real heroes. As he would proceed to pass out, with his ominous aura still lingering in the area. And that's 30 minutes, guys. Meep. No, let's slide into the hospital. So anyway, we'd go into the hospital with Izuku not having any major injuries, just a couple of cuts here and there. Satan couldn't get any of his blood in, seeing as Izuku would vibrate the sound near the knives, causing his blood to shift away or just to pop. As Stain wouldn't have been able to get any of their blood besides Ida, and the dog would still walk in telling him that, okay, so what you did was inappropriate and that we'll have to give all the credit to Endeavor, yada yada yada, same speeches in canon. And this is when Ida would ask the question while a bunch of the other 1A kids, well, 1A is in the hospital while they're there, as Ida would ask, what do you mean? What did you mean when you said that Tensei was at one of your concerts? Izuku would then look at him as he'd say, I probably should have told you guys earlier. Well, not really, but anyway, it's bound to get out eventually. I'm one of Japan's most notorious DJs. I am Clover. There's only a select few of you that know this, being Bakugo and Kyoka, mostly because Kyoka figured it out and Bakugo's been my friend since middle school. Not middle school, since we were kids. But yeah, I'm one of the most renowned DJs in Japan, and Tensei was one of my regulars. He would be out partying, well, not partying, he'd be out enjoying himself on his night off, and 90% of the time, he'd be at the club, well, the clubs that I was, and he, I must say, is a really good dancer. As Ida would look up, saying that, so you knew my brother on a personal level. Izuku would nod as he'd say, yeah, he's been in the back room multiple times. He's a really good friend of mine, Ida, and what happened to him, it wasn't right. But that doesn't mean you get to go out and kill the hero killer. All I'm saying is work on becoming a better hero for Tensei to stop that from happening to any others. That's where I'll be ending it off, guys. And with that, I'm signing out. Peace.